Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. So today's mission is, well, it's pretty intense. We are going to decode the dark, hidden origins of what is probably the world's most famous puppet show.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating one today.
Right. We're exploring some excerpts from Carol M. Mottershead's historical fiction novel, Put on a Happy Face. And I want you to just imagine for a second finding out that this slapstick comedy you laughed at as a kid.
Oh yeah, the squawking voices,
Yeah.
the ridiculous, over-the-top violence,
Exactly, the whole classic Punch and Judy show. Imagine finding out that it's actually the repressed trauma of a 450-year-old immortal woman.
which is just a brilliant and honestly profoundly unsettling shift in perspective.
Totally.
I mean, we're taking this cultural artifact that society is just sort of passively accepted as children's entertainment, right?
Yeah.
And the author is completely turning it inside out. She's using this premise to weave together real historical figures, European folklore, and the very grim realities of domestic abuse.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. It's this sweeping narrative about memory, survival, and really just how human beings process terror.
Okay, let's unpack this because the premise is just wild. I mean, this isn't just your standard 16th century romance novel. Our protagonist, Joan, who, by the way, is the real historical Judy in this universe.
Right, the actual Judy.
Yeah, she is recounting her entire life from a hospital bed in the late 1970s, and she is suffering from selective mutism and massive short-term memory loss.
And that medical mystery, that's really our entry point into the whole thing. The narrative anchors you right there in 1977 and 1979.
Right.
Joan has clearly experienced some massive, unspecified trauma. And at first, the medical establishment in the 70s, they want to use these very blunt instruments to fix her.
Oh, man, yeah. The heavy anxiety meds.
Exactly. They even push for electroshock therapy. It's like they're treating her mind like a malfunctioning machine that just needs a hard reboot.
Which, thankfully, she flat out refuses. You really get this strong sense of her stubborn survival instinct right from the jump.
You really do.
Instead, she relies on her friend Allison, she tries Tai Chi, and she turns to acupuncture just to manage her physical state. But eventually, she begins regression hypnotherapy with this guy, Dr. Goodwin.
Right, the hypnotherapist.
Now, before we get into what she actually remembers, I want to understand the mechanism here. Because, how does a brain just decide to stop speaking and completely forget the recent past? It's like a crashed hard drive.
Well, what's fascinating here is if you think of the human nervous system as this complex electrical grid, right?
Yeah.
It has these built-in safety breakers.
Okay, I follow.
So when a person experiences a trauma that is just way too overwhelming for their conscious mind to process, those breakers trip. So things like selective mutism and dissociative amnesia, they aren't signs of the brain failing.
They're a defense mechanism.
Exactly. They're signs of the brain fiercely protecting itself. It literally walls off the traumatic memory so the organism can simply continue to breathe and exist.
Wow. So her subconscious is essentially this, it's like a pressure cooker with a welded lid.
That's a great way to put it.
Because the trauma can't just
Okay.
evaporate, right? It forces itself out through the weakest seams. And we literally see that happening in the text.
Oh, absolutely.
She develops these really intense obsessions, like she compulsively locks and relocks windows all the time. She hides sharp objects and kitchen knives.
Precisely. I mean, the body remembers what the conscious mind suppresses. It's what we call somatic memory.
Somatic memory, right.
Yeah, so her conscious brain doesn't actually know why a kitchen knife is dangerous in that moment, but her nervous system sure does.
And I think the most telling part is she starts experiencing this sudden, incredibly violent anger toward her own Mr. Punch puppet, because she actually puts on these puppet shows for kids in the 70s, and she finds herself just wanting to throttle the puppet.
Which makes sense. She's acting out centuries of suppressed rage.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where Dr. Goodwin's regression hypnotherapy comes in. Because hypnotherapy doesn't magically unlock doors, right? It gently lowers the defensive walls of the conscious mind. It allows the patient to sort of bypass that pressure cooker lid.
Right.
But to get started, Goodwin naturally asks her to regress to a happy memory, like a safe baseline.
And this raises a wild logistical question for a therapist, doesn't it? Like, if you're trying to walk someone back through their childhood to find a safe baseline, how do you handle a patient whose childhood was in 1536?
Right. It's completely unprecedented for him. But, you follow the mind where it goes. Joan doesn't regress to the 1960s.
Yeah.
She drops all the way back to her actual youth outside Rome in the 16th century.
Which is wild. And what she finds there isn't exactly this purely happy bustline either. It is heartbreakingly isolated.
Very much so.
She's the daughter of this incredibly aloof, wealthy father, and her only real emotional anchor is her mother, who tragically dies when Joan is just 14. And the sensory details the author includes here are so visceral.
Oh, the woven basket coffin.
Yes, lined with lamb's wool and covered in winter flowers. And the part that really stuck with me, she remembers being forced to give her mother one last, freezing cold goodbye kiss in a damp crypt. I mean, ugh.
Yeah, it's chilling. And what's fascinating here is how that freezing kiss really functions as her foundational trauma.
How so?
Psychologically, a child's sense of safety is entirely tethered to their primary caregiver,
Mm.
right? So when that caregiver is removed, and especially in such a cold, final, sensory-rich way, it just shatters the child's baseline reality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
She's basically left with a father who practically ignores her existence until, he suddenly decides she needs to be molded into a lady for his own social climbing.
But that forced entry into society is what completely changes her trajectory. They take these trips into Rome, and Joan encounters a commedia dell'arte troupe.
Right, the street theater.
Yeah, for those of you listening who might not be familiar, this is 16th century Italian street theater. We're talking loud music, acrobats, fire breathers, and actors in these grotesque masks doing really highly physical slapstick comedy.
It's very chaotic and vibrant.
Exactly. And there, in all that chaos, Joan falls instantly in love with an actor wearing a beak-like mask and a fake paunch. And his name is Pulcinella.
And, that attraction makes perfect psychological sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
Pulcinella represents the exact opposite of Joan's rigid, emotionally frozen life.
Oh, totally.
He's expressive, he's chaotic, and he basically refuses to take the world seriously. But most importantly, he makes her laugh. He thaws that emotional freeze she's been in since her mother's death.
But of course, the father finds out and goes absolutely ballistic. He calls Pulcinella a gigolo and a vagrant. Joan is screaming that she loves him, so the father summons Pulcinella and sets this impossible, terrifying task for him to prove his worth. The crocodile test.
Her famous crocodile test.
I mean, wait, I have to point out how incredibly cinematic this is. Are you telling me the origin of this famous puppet romance involves a literal crocodile wrestling match?
It literally does. The local menagerie had recently imported an African crocodile, or a cocodrillo.
Right.
And the father demands that Pulcinella capture it, fully expecting the actor to just be killed or humiliated.
And Pulcinella is sweating bullets, right? Facing down this prehistoric monster, snapping its jaws, and he literally tries calling it like a cat. He goes, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty."
Let's look at the mechanics of that reaction, though, because it tells us absolutely everything about who Pulcinella is.
Okay, yeah.
When he's faced with a lethal, terrifying threat, he doesn't use stoicism or martial skill. He uses humor as a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
He is a performer to his absolute core.
He's performing for his life.
Exactly. By calling the crocodile kitty, he is attempting to shrink the terror down to a manageable size.
He's using bravado to mask sheer panic. But the crazy thing is, it actually works.
It does.
He studies the creature, he finds its blind spots, he uses a two-pronged pitchfork to pin its neck and lassos its snout. He wrestles it into submission and just turns to the father with this smug grin.
And that specific blend of exaggerated physical action, terror, and cheeky bravado,
Yeah.
that really sets the foundation for the physical comedy that will eventually define the entire Punch and Judy mythos later on.
Wow. So he wins her hand, they marry on January 8th, 1554, and Joan actually wears her mother's green velvet dress.
It's a beautiful moment.
It really is. It's like she's reclaiming her past. But then, reality sets in. Joan joins the Commedia dell'arte troupe. She's playing the bass drum. She's translating charters. They have a son named Nicholas. But the itinerant lifestyle is just grueling.
Yeah, and this is really where the mask begins to consume the man. Pulcinella becomes highly successful, but the pressure makes him erratic.
Right.
He works constantly, he starts drinking heavily, and his boundary between slapstick performer and father just completely dissolves.
Yeah, he starts doing these terrifying things, like tossing baby Nicholas dangerously high in the air just for laughs. Or he'll call the toddler over and then suddenly dodge out of the way so Nicholas falls down hard.
Which is horrible to watch.
And the other mothers tell Joan she's just being overprotective, but Joan can see real fear in her son's eyes.
And Joan is completely marginalized here. She has absolutely no social or legal power to force her husband to change his behavior. She just has to watch her son becoming highly anxious and withdrawn, basically absorbing all that domestic terror.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. To help him cope, Joan draws on her own childhood habit of talking to dolls, and she decides to make puppets for Nicholas.
Right.
She actually uses the hollow tooth from that very crocodile Pulcinella wrestled. She fills it with seed so it rattles, and uses quartz and coral for the body.
That's such a great detail.
Yeah, so she makes a daddy puppet, a baby puppet, a pretty Polly puppet for the cousin who helps raise Nicholas, and a mammy puppet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is executing a brilliant historical inversion here. The world's most famous, notoriously violent puppet show didn't start as street entertainment at all.
Right.
In this narrative universe, it started as 16th century child play therapy.
Which, I have to admit, I struggle with this concept a bit because, okay, if you have an abusive or terrifying father, how does giving a kid a puppet of that father and having a mammy puppet hit it with a rolling pin actually help? Doesn't that just sort of normalize the violence for the child?
That's a very common assumption, but we really have to look at the psychology of play therapy. A child in an abusive home has zero agency.
Okay.
The real world is massive, unpredictable, and physically dangerous. But by externalizing the threat into a small, inanimate object like a puppet, the child suddenly becomes the giant. The threat is contained.
Oh, wow. I see.
Yeah, it creates a safe, controlled sandbox where Nicholas can process his powerlessness. So if the daddy puppet throws the baby puppet out the window in the game, the mammy puppet can intervene, hit him, and tell him off. It provides the catharsis and resolution that the child is entirely denied in real life.
That makes so much sense. She basically created a safe space for him to literally shout at the monster.
Exactly. And the deep tragedy here is that Joan continues this exact practice in 1979.
Yeah.
When she performs in the modern day, she hands puppets to the children in her audience so they can express their anger safely. She has spent centuries facilitating the emotional processing of traumatized children, all stemming from her initial inability to physically protect her own son.
It is incredibly heavy. And, well, this brings up a massive transition in the story, because play therapy only works if the child eventually grows up and can escape the environment, right?
Right.
But what happens if the nightmare literally never ends?
Ah, you're referring to the events of 1559.
I am. The troupe is traveling to England for Queen Elizabeth I's coronation, and they get caught right in the middle of a battle at Calais between the English and the French.
Just absolute chaos.
Complete chaos. Joan's aloof father is struck by a stray arrow and killed, and Joan, Pulcinella, baby Nicholas, and cousin Polly are all left bleeding out on the docks.
And in the midst of this carnage, a mysterious wedding guest of theirs reappears. It's the real-life historical figure John Dee.
The famous mathematician, astronomer, and alchemist guy.
Exactly. And he offers them a vial of healing potion.
But he warns them that there will be consequences.
Right, and the consequence, which unfolds over the ensuing decades, is biological immortality. Their cells just stop aging, they become immune to disease.
Which initially sounds like the ultimate gift until you realize the horrific catch. Baby Nicholas is trapped forever in the body of a child.
Yeah, that's just devastating.
Even when he is over 100 years old, he only stands 56 inches tall. He has the mind of a grown man, but the world perpetually treats him as a novelty or an infant.
It really forces you to consider the crushing burden of timelessness. Immortality in this book isn't glamorous at all. It's an isolating prison. But from a narrative standpoint, it allows the author to use this immortal family as witnesses to centuries of history.
Right, because they end up spending time in England and befriend a young William Shakespeare. And I love that he isn't the revered bard we usually think of. He's this struggling, slightly annoying playwright just constantly complaining about his forced marriage to Anne Hathaway.
It's a great touch.
But Shakespeare asks them a favor. He asks them to take in a young African orphan named John.
Yes. John had survived a plague ship that killed his parents, and he was thrown into a brutal workhouse. Joan and Pulcinella adopt him, and he becomes a beloved member of their family. He's almost a surrogate brother to Nicholas.
Yeah, they're super close.
But John dreams of autonomy. He wants to travel to the New World, to the colonies in Virginia, to work as an indentured servant and eventually earn his own land. So he leaves the troop.
And when he boards the ship, the quartermaster mishears his family name, Pulcinella, and writes down John Punch. And man, when I read that, it stopped me dead in my tracks. Because the author is tying Joan's fictional life directly into one of the darkest true stories of early America, isn't she?
She absolutely is.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the book masterfully anchors its magical realism in sobering, devastating historical fact.
Right.
The historical John Punch was an indentured servant in Virginia in the 1640s. He attempted to run away to Maryland with 2 European indentured servants.
And they were caught.
They were caught, and the
Yeah.
2 white servants simply had their terms of service extended by a few years. John Punch, however, was sentenced by the colonial council to enslavement for the rest of his natural life.
Just because of the color of his skin.
Exactly. Historians widely consider the John Punch ruling to be the first documented legal sanctioning of lifelong race-based slavery in the English colonies. It was a horrific legal turning point that laid the groundwork for institutionalized slavery in America.
I mean, imagine you're Joan. You're immortal. You live through the scale of history. You read a brief news account years later about a black man named John Punch being sentenced for life. You know it's the boy you raised, and you are entirely powerless to stop it.
It's unbearable, and the sheer weight of that helplessness is what finally fractures the family. The loss of John, combined with the endless crushing reality that they can never have more children and can never escape each other, it completely breaks Pulcinella's mind.
Yeah, he just can't handle the endlessness. He turns to heavy drinking. He starts smoking these mind-altering Maddox cigarettes brought over by privateers. His personality drastically shifts from erratic to just outright paranoid and cruel.
And this brings us to the actual origin of the famous puppet violence. I mean, if you've ever seen a Punch and Judy show, you know the classic comedy routine. Judy hits Punch with a frying pan over some sausages, and the audience just roars with laughter.
Right, it's a classic bit.
But the lived reality that Joan experienced was utterly terrifying.
Yeah, she had spent all day caring for the family, scraping together a meager dinner of sausages. And Pulcinella, in this drunken, spiteful stupor, takes their only food and feeds it to a dog.
Just to be cruel.
Just to be cruel. And Joan, pushed to the absolute brink of exhaustion, starvation, and despair, grabs the nearest object, her frying pan, and hits him over the head.
Psychologically, this is a moment where her own pressure cooker finally explodes. She is instantly horrified by her loss of control. But Pulcinella's retaliation is entirely disproportionate. It leads to the inciting incident that shatters their lives.
Yeah. So Pulcinella's best friend is a man named Scaramouche who travels with a little terrier dog named Toby. And one night, Pulcinella comes home in a drug-fueled rage and sees Joan crying on Scaramouche's shoulder.
And he completely loses his grip on reality.
He grabs a heavy walking cane. Scaramouche tries to defend Joan, but Pulcinella beats his best friend to death. And when the little dog Toby tries to protect his master, Pulcinella beats the dog to death too.
It is a scene of raw domestic horror. The constables arrive, and Pulcinella is caught literally red-handed. And because there is no ambiguity about his guilt, he is denied a trial and immediately sentenced to be executed.
And because this book continuously intertwines with real history, his execution happens to be scheduled on the exact same day as the historical execution of James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, in 1685.
Yes.
And the executioner that day is the infamous Jack Ketch.
Right. Let's unpack the historical context of Jack Ketch for a second, because it explains how Pulcinella actually survives. Jack Ketch is notorious in British history for his sheer incompetence and brutality. He didn't administer clean beheadings, he butchered people.
The scene in the book is gruesome. Ketch strikes James Scott, but the blow doesn't sever the head. And the crowd is watching this horrific spectacle as Ketch just hacks away again and again. You have to remember, public executions were spectator events, but there were still rules of decorum. The crowd is so disgusted and enraged by the barbarity that they snap. They start to riot, rushing the scaffold to tear Jack Ketch apart.
And the mechanism of that riot provides the perfect cover. In the sheer chaos of that mob violence, Pulcinella, who is next in line for the block, manages to slip his bonds and vanish into the crowd. Joan and Nicholas are forced to flee England entirely to escape the fallout.
I am just stunned by the escalation here. When you look at the cast of the traditional Punch and Judy show, You have Mr. Punch, Judy, the baby, the dog Toby, Scaramouche, the hangman Jack Ketch, the frying pan. I always assumed these were just wacky archetypes invented for kids.
Right. But in the context of this book, they are exact manifestations of Joan's lived trauma. Every single character represents a specific day of terror.
Wow.
Joan has spent the last few centuries watching her literal nightmare be turned into a global comedy routine. Every time a modern puppeteer brings out Scaramouche or the hangman for a laugh, she is forced to relive the worst days of her life, packaged as a joke.
Which brings us all the way back to the 1970s, to Joan in the hospital, unable to speak, her memory actively suppressing the present. During her final hypnosis session with Dr. Goodwin, the lid of the pressure cooker finally comes off.
It finally pops.
She remembers the specific modern-day trauma that caused her brain to shut down in the first place.
She had been walking past a newsagent in 1977, and she happened to glance at a poster advertising an exhibit or a film about the French Revolution.
The headline on the poster read, "Heads roll for the last time in France." And staring out from that poster, on the face of a man being led to the guillotine, were Pulcinella's eyes.
But they weren't frantic or cruel anymore.
No, they were calm, resigned. She realized that after centuries of running from his own mind and the burden of immortality, her husband had finally found a way to die. The shock of that finality simply short-circuited her brain.
It is the ultimate tragic irony. The man who violently escaped Jack Ketch's axe centuries earlier finally, quietly submits to the guillotine.
So what does this all mean? We started by talking about how the brain protects itself, how trauma isn't visible on an X-ray.
Well, this deep dive and the book itself really challenges you to look at the media and the myths you consume. We digest tragic stories, historical violence, and abuse as slapstick comedy all the time.
It's a time.
Have you ever caught yourself laughing at a cartoon where a character gets hit with a frying pan or chased by a dog? We laugh at Mr. Punch hitting Judy with a stick without ever questioning what that violence actually represents in the real world.
We use comedy to distance ourselves from horror.
Exactly. This narrative asks you to look past the punchline, pun intended, of course, and find the human reality, the pain, and the survival mechanisms underneath the mask.
It fundamentally changes the way you look at folklore. It
Hmm.
makes you wonder what else we're laughing at that is actually rooted in someone else's nightmare. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think about the oldest, most familiar fairy tales or cultural myths you grew up with, the ones you just know by heart. Now imagine if the classic villain or the punchline of that story, the wicked stepmother, the big bad wolf, the foolish jester, suddenly got the microphone and the chance to tell the story from their point of view. How would the entire history of the world change if we finally stopped laughing and just listened?